I'm black, you're white.
Now what? So what if I say the wrong thing?
You probably will. Who doesn't? But I'll do my best to listen.
Maybe if we're humble enough to listen to each other,
Maybe if we're brave enough to lean into those difficult conversations.
we might
We could
come up with some answers,
make some real progress
discover how much we have in common.
and appreciate our differences.
Now you're talking.
Well, good morning. Normally we say good evening, but today we're doing a special wake up early Sunday morning recording. So good morning. I'm David Conley, communications consultant.
And I'm Chris Thurber, clinical psychologist.
And welcome to another episode of I'm Black, You're White, Now What? And today this is Double Down Sunday. We got two white people and two black people. So we're ready. And we're international with it. So This is going to be a great episode. First of all, let me just say Happy New Year to everybody, and especially to you, Doc. Was blessed to be able to spend some time with you and the family just a little bit before Christmas holiday, which was great. So we really had a good time up in Boston and appreciate that. And I don't know about you, but our Christmas was really nice. Was able to take the family to the North Georgia mountains where we had a nice cabin that we sort of verboed or whatever, and just had some nice reconnecting time with just my wife and the kids, and it was really good. And then that was a great time for us to do all of that before we sent Jacob back off to college, and so he's back there now, and hopefully being safe with all of the Omicron things going on, because a lot of people are testing positive even up there, and Boston was doing pretty good with it. But how was your holiday?
It was good. Yeah. Thanks for asking. Happy New Year to everyone. I was also blessed to be able to spend good amount of time with family. Simo, my wife, and I went with our boys to see my brother in San Francisco, and played a lot of dominoes and cards and did a lot of good cooking. And then we were back here for a week of just being at home and chilling out. And we're now a week into the continuation of the winter term at school, and it's a little bit of students being in their rooms and isolating as we did in the fall of 2020, but hopefully, as you said, it's short-lived, and with vaccinations and masks and everything, we can be back to a little bit more of in-person learning. But so it's great. And as you said, we're really excited because a bit of an international show today. We're joined by Johan LaRue and Mazamo Molloy, who in a moment will introduce themselves, but are joining us both from Johannesburg, South Africa. So about 5:30 in the evening there. Gentlemen, thank you for taking some time out of your Sunday evening to be our guests.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having me. Hopefully I don't fall asleep, because as you guys would say, I just came from a cookout, as you guys would say. So hopefully I don't get the itis. So.
Hopefully you don't. Well, teach me. So what is it? What, before you give us your bio, Mazamo, what is a cookout in South African? I mean, what would you call it?
So we call it a braai. And
a braai. Okay.
A braai, and it's very meat oriented. So so it had a lot of had a steak, had some sausage, what we call wors, and salad. Bread is optional. Drinks and dessert. So that was good.
All right.
Yeah.
Well,
so we kind of do it all. Yeah.
If you want to take a quick nap in the middle, it's totally
no.
Right. Well, at my braais, the salad is optional. That's what, so what's the point of a cookout with salad? But anyway,
there you go. It's color. I guess.
Trying to keep it to that new year, new me type thing. It's
right. Balance is key. Balance.
Yeah.
Well, Mazamo, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll hear from Johan. We'll have a great discussion. We're so happy to have you both here with us.
Yeah.
I am a 30-something South African. So I currently reside in Johannesburg. So by ethnicity, I'm Black. So I've lived in Johannesburg pretty much most of my entire life, but I grew up in a township called Soweto. Well, in the townships of Johannesburg called Soweto. I have a background in IT and web development, and then switched over into sports media and broadcasting. So I've been in broadcasting and voiceover work predominantly for the last 7 years. And also we're big on multiculturalism as a family. And that's the ethos of our community in terms of reaching others. So reaching the other and trying to make the other known. A lot of our work, or at least a lot of our relationships, are about how do we cross the bridge, whether it's someone of a different ethnicity or someone of a different standing in society. So that's me.
Mhm.
Awesome. Welcome. Johan.
So yeah, I'm Johan Leroux. I just want to make a quick correction. I actually don't live in Johannesburg at the moment. I'm in Cape
Kicked him
Town,
out.
and
Okay.
as a Cape Townian, I feel very proud to live in Cape Town because it's the most beautiful place in the world. It's not as smoky as the big smoke of Johannesburg, so I just wanted to make that correction. But yeah, I'm also a 30-something. I'm married. I've got 2 boys. One is 4, one is 1. Was also in sport broadcasting for a few years, and then recently switched over to psychology. So I'm currently working as a clinical psychologist in a prison or a correctional services center in the Western Cape. And yeah, I suppose one of the things that drew me to psychology is my deep fascination with people and how people work. And I think the more I learn about people, the more I learn about myself as well. And I've realized that the more I learn, the more that there's still so much to learn. And I'm just really excited about this conversation, also to learn from you, but also hopefully to learn more about myself through the process as well. So thank you very much for having me as a guest.
Yeah, no, we're thrilled. And I should let our viewers and our listening audience know that I was honored to be a guest on Johan's podcast, and we'll put links and contact information for folks who are watching this on YouTube underneath the video, and for listings on Spotify and other podcatchers. We'll make sure that if people want to be in touch with either of you, they can. But Johan invited me to be a guest on his parenting podcast, and then through Johan, David and I got to meet Zamo. And I guess one question that I'd love to lead with, because the 4 of us are fathers, and whether a father or mother or parent of some sort, I think that David and I have had a lot of conversations in the past about how we've spoken with our kids, and our kids are older than your kids. David has kids in their 20s, and mine are 17 and 19. You have kids who are 1.5, 5, 7, 8, and I'm watching headlines here in the United States that have to do with social justice and racial tension. For example, just this week, Ahmaud Arbery's 3 assailants were sentenced to life in prison, and people are watching these headlines very closely, and I put that for myself in the context of, say, the civil rights movement and the ways in which, since the 1960s, there has been, very slow actualization of some of the hopes and dreams of that movement. And more recently in South Africa, the abolition, sort of legally, of apartheid in the early 90s. But again, you can pass a law, it doesn't instantaneously result in social change. So I'm just curious to hear from both of you about any interesting conversations you've had with your children, who, as I said, are younger than mine or David's, about ethnicity, about race, about the history of apartheid. This is a big overarching question, but if you can focus on a particular conversation or two, I think it would be fascinating for me anyway to hear in a different country with a different history, but perhaps with some of the same goals in terms of equity, what that sounds like on the ground when a parent talks to their child.
Sure. So I have a 7-year-old daughter. Well, she turned 7 in February. And one of the things that, so the context of this is that, so I'm in a mixed ethnicity marriage. So my daughter looks like me, but doesn't look like me. But she's much more beautiful than me, thank God. So she is living in a world that I didn't grow up in. So the context of where she's coming up is completely different. There's an element of being upwardly mobile, element of experiencing things that I wouldn't have necessarily experienced when I was growing up. And so it's, especially being South Africa, being the country that it is, of our past with apartheid, our struggles now, or at least the sharp end of the stick, is becoming a economic struggle. But because of our past, economic inequality is tied to race. So we have this. So there's still a lot of people are living in places where they were ordered to live. So yeah, obviously there's been a lot of crossover, but for the most part, a lot of Black people are still living where Black people were pushed to live, whether it's out on the outskirts of town, that kind of thing. And so my daughter will ask me questions like, "Dad, why do those people not have cars to drive around with?" And so obviously she sees the line of Black people waiting to get on a bus or in a taxi, and she's starting to ask these questions. Why don't they have a car? And then starting to okay, am I going to push out this conversation until she's 10 and act like it doesn't exist? Or am I going to start deconstructing and start talking about about the situation? And I think for my wife and I, we found that we've tried to be as age appropriate as possible, but there's just some things that you can't put on rose tinted glasses, as they'd say. So it's the conversations around, this is the case regarding our past. People were, because on the basis of their skin color, they were forced to live in other places, and things were taken away from them. So trying to explain for her in a way she understands why it is that a majority of Black people are in public transport. And she'll ask a question around, so Soweto is effectively what, David, you'd call the hood, right? So then she'll ask, why is it dirty here? Right? And then the uncomfortability, and it's uncomfortable because I'm like, oh, what is she saying about where I grew up? But then there's the element of, yeah, there's the past, but then there's the current social, there's the current service delivery issues that we've got in the country, and those tensions right now. So it's having to have those honest conversations with my daughter. And it's stuff that even when I've tried to put it off, like, okay, sweetie, you know what, let's talk about this next week. And I'll tell you 4 days later, she'll say, Dad, remember the conversation we had about apartheid? Can we talk about it? Because one of the things that happens is that obviously they learn about history. And so she's going into the first grade this year, and they'll talk about history. And then she was only hearing it from a certain perspective. So one of the things that we're trying to do as well is get in front of it, where we're actually, at least she's hearing it from us and not from someone who perhaps has I'm not saying they're not being divisive or anything like that, but so when we talk about it, that she understands who she is, that grapple around identity, her understanding that being taught by someone who's of a darker skin tone does not mean it's inferior. Trying to make sure that she understands that getting instruction from Uncle David is just as good as getting instruction from Uncle Johan. And so those are the kind of things that we've been forced to upskill on, having those kind of conversations, trying to create conversations around like new kinds of heroes, right?
Mm.
Because yes, my daughter loves Frozen. She's in it. She loves Rapunzel. She loves Paw Patrol. She's in there, right? And those are good shows. They talk about certain values, but then also it's also the framing in terms of like, but there are other heroes out there as well. So we've been really helped with having like talking about throwing a Moana, for instance, and going out there looking for content which speaks to who she is as well, speaks about diversity, speaks about inclusivity. For instance, we were watching the movie Vivo on Netflix late last year, and she goes, "Mom, I really like this movie. There are a lot of brown people in it, you know." and so it was just like, okay, so she does notice. So it's about having those difficult conversations with her, but also getting her to understand that, you know, this is where we come from, but this is where we're working towards. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I really love that, because I think that's exactly what we also try to do, is just to be having open and honest conversations before our children learn messages that might be incorrect from other people. And like you said, when I was growing up, I noticed that there were certain people that drove in cars and certain people that used public transport. And nobody explained the history of South Africa to me when I was 4 or 5 years old. And so I made my own assumptions. Okay, well, this type of group of people, they are obviously wealthy. That means they must be more intelligent or whatever the case is. And as a child, you don't really think about that. Those are just the assumptions that you make. And I think that's where we've also tried to be really intentional with our children. And our oldest is only 4.5 now. So we've also tried to be age appropriate, but just to be honest with him. And I think the one kind of little story that maybe illustrates something that I was also, that he experienced at school was in South Africa, a lot of people speak Afrikaans. And so the one color that they use is called, and a lot of people still call it this, they call it menskleur, which is human color. And it's that pink, whitish type of color. And obviously one of the other kids at the school must have used that. So our son came home and he said, no, this is the color that he used. And so we also just use that as an opportunity to say, well, that doesn't mean that just because you're that color that you're a mens and other people, or a human and other people are not humans. And so that was an opportunity that we looked for, just to try and explain to him that maybe in the past, people of color or Black people weren't valued as human beings, because unfortunately that's the history that we have as South Africans. And then also to kind of just explain what are some of the repercussions of that. And that's also interesting, because I often try to, as a psychologist, I want to hear what my children are thinking most of the time. So he's also in a little school now where there are people with white skin and people with darker skin. And I try to kind of engage him on that and to ask him if it means anything to him. And at the moment, he's still like, well, no, this person has darker skin and it doesn't mean anything. But I know as he grows up and he grows a little bit older, he might start attaching meaning to different colors. And I guess that's where we as the parents have a responsibility to try and explain to him, well, just because somebody has this certain skin color doesn't mean that he's any less of a human being, or just because other people at school maybe teaches them certain things, it doesn't mean that that is true. And then use that as an opportunity to kind of explain to him the history of our country. And I suppose the history that has played itself out in all countries all over the world.
Right. I'm curious because you guys both brought up school. And so here in the US, you know, there was a big debate about what they're calling critical race theory. And a lot of the fear, as I see it, is that people have been teaching American history one way, meaning these are the people who did everything for America. And 1 month out of the year, we'll come and talk about some darker skinned people who, you know, may have stumbled on a few things or whatever, but really the people who, you know, made this country what it is, or these people, and this is how they did blah, 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 without covering basically the good, the bad, and the ugly. And critical race theory is supposed to essentially give everybody sort of, you know, like the what the real history is, not to put down white people or the accomplishments of anybody who was white and accomplished anything in the country, but to raise all the people who, made contributions to the greatness of the country. So I guess my question is, and I'm just saying this because I'm ignorant of South African history to a large degree, but I'm just wondering if what they're teaching in school is similar to, how they're teaching it over here, where they're minimizing that teaching has minimized the contributions of people of color, of women, and all of that in school. And now the push for that representation more is causing this big, huge, sort of academic upheaval with some parents. So I'm just wondering, is there any sort of experience like that with you all, where you have to be particularly intentional? I know you touched on a little bit of intentionality with your children, but where you have to, I would think now, if I had children as young as you all, that I would have to be even more, I would be inspired to be even more intentional about making sure that they were aware and that I was teaching that, more so in my house. So I'm just curious as to the experience in South Africa for that.
So I guess so my daughter is going into formative education or formal education now in terms of first grade. So I haven't necessarily been exposed to what is the curriculum in terms of this is what we teach, but from broad strokes, because of, I guess also there's what our past, the opportunity with our past is that they because we were so late in the game, in terms of when things ended, is that we can't act like it didn't happen. So right. the thing around our past, the thing around where we come from, why we are at the situation where we're at, that's
more
common conversation. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's no one can try and plaster over the truth of this is what happened, that separate development was legislation, that Black people couldn't get married to white people, that it was illegal to fraternize with a certain group of people. So I think in terms of our education system, there's more a case of, for us, because of our past, it's more a thing of, we know where we come from. So how do we then go forward knowing what we've experienced? And I think for the most part, because like I said earlier, right now it's a tilt towards economics, because at the end of the day, how do we change a nation is by making sure that our economy is pushing in the right direction. So it would be very easy actually to, let's just make this an economics thing, it's a jobs thing, but we have a past that speaks to why we are where we're at. It's in our faces every day. So we can try and be nice about it in our little huddles, but even when we talk about our education system, we can't avoid it. I think it's going to be interesting as we continue to track with our daughter in terms of what are the things that they're learning in school, whether or not we're going to say, hold up, you need to talk about this at length, or at least you need to give a broader expression to what they're learning, not just this was World War I, World War II, apartheid, moving on. Interestingly enough, at the braai, the cookout I was at earlier, my friend's father, he's a teacher, and he was telling me how the kids really get interested in terms of like World War I, World War II. These are big events, there's a war, all of that. But then when they have to learn about apartheid, they're like, and these are kids of many ethnicities, Black, white, colored, Indian. And for them, it's like, well, it doesn't hit home as much, right? But then he said, okay, but I need you to go find someone who lived through the legislated part of this. And when these kids come back with the stories of what they've learned, that's where it hits home, because it could be easy for them to just teach it and then leave it. Let's move on to the Renaissance, or let's move on to another part of the world. But it takes intentionality for young people to actually learn and understand what are the reasons that we're here. There's a song the other day that I was listening to, a lady by the name of Taniso Mazwai. I don't know who she's quoting, but she says, "The world changes, revolutionaries die, and children forget." So it's one of those things where we have to continue to remind ourselves of where we're at, of where we come from, but also strive to move forward. It's almost like I was talking with a friend of mine earlier today, that it's the tension of living in the now, and wanting what we see is best for us in the future. So I think our education system, from where I'm sitting at, we can't avoid conversations around our past. Yeah.
I think from me, because also my children aren't in what we call primary school yet, so their education that they get is still very much just about learning how to read and write and do very basic things. But I remember when I went to high school, which was in 2002, 2003, which was almost 10 years after South Africa's democracy, we were still being taught about the apartheid years and about 1950 and where the national government took over. And we did go through the whole history and eventually how South Africa became a democratic country. But nowhere was the apartheid years really criticized too heavily. Now, that might be because of the teacher that I had or the school that I was attending. But that was part of the curriculum. And I know that things have changed now, but how much they've changed, I don't know if it is enough, because I do think that a lot of the history that we are still being taught, not enough is being taught about people's lived experiences. I think everybody now knows about apartheid, but nobody knows what it really did to people and how terrible it was for people. But not just that, how that continues to affect people nowadays. And I do think that you probably get some teachers and educators who are trying to have those conversations, but I think that's probably what we need to do more and more of, is just to explain to people, and for somebody like myself to really get an understanding of, sure, this is what it meant for you back then, but this is still how it continues to affect you now. This is still how it continues to affect your family. This is what I didn't have to experience as a white South African. This is the privilege that I've had. And like I said earlier, it's not just about not just about kind of knowing that with head knowledge, but really trying to understand people's lived experiences. And that's why I loved what you said, Mzamo, about getting people's stories, because that's when that really starts hitting home, and you get a really good understanding of, sure, this is actually what it meant for a lot of people.
Resonated with them or what happened.
Yeah, it's is going back to something Mzamo said just in your introduction, the idea of trying to better understand the other, rather than I've heard people use the word other as a transitive verb, like I'm othering someone, instead of seeing what our commonalities are, focusing on what the differences are. And even though many of those differences can be celebrated, differences are also, historically and in the present day leveraged to, to fuel prejudice and subjugate other people, whether, as David said, it's someone of a different ethnicity or someone with a different gender identity. And it is remarkable to me that this critical race theory, which is 40 years old, is being misunderstood in a reactionary way by so many American parents as critical as a synonym for put down, rather than critical as a synonym for academically honest or complete. Like, I'm going to offer, here's my criticism of this movie, or I'm going to talk about what I liked about it. I'm going to talk about what I didn't like about it. I'm not just going to malign it. And it's coming from the parents. I haven't spoken to any young people at the summer camps to which I consult, or the schools I visited, or my own kids. They seem quite open to a more balanced and therefore honest view of history than the grown-ups, who are, some of them, wanting to protect their kids. I'm talking about white parents wanting to protect their white kids from feeling badly about what other white people have done in the past. And I think that white parents should give their white kids a bit more credit for being able to take a critical in the sense of complete, at many aspects of US history, and for that matter, world history. But it's remarkable. And I hope that the conversations that the two of you as parents are having, as you said, Mazamo, in the most age appropriate way that you can. And it's not a conversation, of course, a series of conversations, which, depending on the questions and the age of your child, are different each time. But yeah, it's just, even though we're talking about legislation and change in the United States that predates the I guess abolition is the right word, of apartheid in South Africa, we're encountering, as David pointed out, some of the same resistance. And searching for solutions. Go ahead.
And I got it. I'm sorry. I have a sort of, I guess, a question. This is fascinating to me too, because, like Chris just said, some of the same things, we're dealing with, even though the timelines of certain change, legislative or whatever, is different, but some of the same issues. So this question is more for Chris and Johan. I'm curious. Okay, so just to set the question up, earlier, Chris mentioned about the Ahmaud Arbery case. I'm not sure. I'm imagining you guys may have heard about it. But Ahmaud Arbery was a Black man running through a neighborhood here in Georgia. He was jogging and he stopped and looked at a house that was being framed out, and then was continuing to run on, and three men got in the truck, basically chased him down at gunpoint. And when he tried to defend himself, because obviously he was in fear, they shot him, and killed him. And so they were recently convicted and sentenced to life in prison. So when I'm having a discussion about that, a lot of people felt like the sentence was just. But then one person was saying to me, well, they had to do that because Black people would have rioted in the streets, which is, a very true statement. But I was suggesting that there is a scenario where the judge, albeit white, was a person who may have been a just individual and doled out the sentence according to how he felt the rule of law was and what was fair. I'm saying this because historically here, in a lot of cases, at least the perception is, especially from Black people, is that if a white person is on trial for killing a Black person, that white person is going to either get off scot-free or get a much lighter sentence than either they should or than their Black counterpart in a similar situation. So the fear and expectation is that the white judge, simply because he's dealing with three white men who killed a Black person, will not give them life in prison, but maybe give them, 10 years probation or something, crazy. But I'm saying this all to set up a question, because I'm thinking there's a scenario where this man said, hey, you know what? This is wrong. What they did was heinous. It was wrong. It was inhumane, and they should go to prison for life. And he gave them that sentence, not because he feared rioting in the streets, or not because of some other mitigating consequence that would then force his inherently racist heart to make this decision. You know what I mean? So I want to know from Chris in America and Johan in South Africa, how you deal with, or if it even occurs to you or have to deal with, but how do you deal with in these conversations, the assumption, the immediate assumption that you're the villain? Like historically, you have been in the villain class. And so now when you're in these things, I don't know you, Johan. You're probably, like the most evil some gun in South Africa and America, but I doubt it from what I'm just hearing. But I know Chris Thurber, and I know that he is not that guy from his heart. You know what I mean, and that he's well intentioned, that he wants the best for people, and that kind of thing. So I just wonder, when you are dealing out here, like, does that weigh on you? Do you experience that? What is that like? Because I think a lot of times there's just an assumption that you're either feeling what I think you're feeling, or that you're okay with being, you know what I mean, this privileged guy who looks down on me and Muzamo.
Chris, do you want to respond, and I'll respond after you?
Sure. I mean, one of the things that I would say, David, is that as a consequence of the 7-8 year friendship that you and I have, and the 23 years that I've been working at Phillips Exeter Academy with, a student body that, nearly 40% of whom identify as a member of a traditionally underserved minority, or underprivileged minority, and a very diverse faculty, is that I am able to separate, I think, the criticism of a particular white person or white people in general from a criticism of me as a white person. So my lived experience is that I've not over personalized critiques of white privilege, or the way that a white judge might act, or the way that someone might.
No, I guess I'm asking. I just want to be clear. I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but I want to know, in times, if there have been, in times where you personally have had a conversation with somebody who is with a group of Black students, a Black student, or whatever, where the conversation is sort of hamstring off rip because you're a white man. And so you obviously think this, and this, or this is obviously where you're coming from, whatever. So not like I'm putting, for instance, the sentencing of these white men on you, but I'm saying I was using that as an example to say that the assumption immediately about this white judge is that he's doing what he's doing for fear of some other reprisal, as opposed to just from the fact that he is a man who happens to be white. I'm saying, I'm sure there are circumstances where you are dealing with the best intentions in a conversation with anybody. It doesn't have to be a young person at the school. It could be anybody. But in that conversation, you notice that you are being, that the assumption is being made that you are coming from a particular place that you're not coming from, based on the fact that you are a white man. So I'm asking about your personal experience with that.
Yeah. Now I better understand your question. And the answer is it's been hard. But that difficulty is nothing in comparison to what perhaps you or Mazamo or someone else with much darker skin deals with on a consistent basis. And I would say that I used to be more defensive of my personal position, like, hey, I'm not that person, I'm not, and I'm more patient and reflective when I am mischaracterized now because I'm white, thinking, as Mazamo and Johan both said in different ways earlier, about, well, what does it mean? This person may not know me particularly well, but I don't know them enough to know what in their life experience has led to mischaracterizing me in this way. So I try to take a more patient step back and see it in the context of what like racial inequity has been. And I can honestly say that that is in my life something that's like much more recent, I would say, in the last 4 or 5 years, that I've been started to be able to do. As I said, I used to take it much more personally and therefore be much more defensive. I don't know, Johan, what it has been like for you.
I think I've also had a very similar experience where I would say, probably more than 5 years ago, I was also very defensive when somebody would make an accusation to say that, well, all white people are racist, or all you are just like other people in some ways. And not that that happened often, but I think there was always this kind of understanding when you see a black person, then they might think that you're a certain way and you might think that they're a certain way, and there's this lot of confusion. And I think that was always quite uncomfortable, and I didn't like that. And I maybe also would have tried to very quickly respond to say, well, I'm not like them, or I know here in South Africa the line is always, but I have black friends, and so that is supposed to kind of cure you from being racist completely. But again, I think that's where. And I suppose I'll be honest as well. At some point, I also would have felt a little bit sorry for myself to think that, but I'm just put in this group, and to think that, okay, well, maybe you become a little bit successful. People will say, well, that's just because of your white privilege, and I didn't like that. But now that I've hopefully gotten a little bit more maturity, I understand that where people are coming from. So the reason why they would make certain comments or think certain things is completely justified. And I also need to accept that maybe the reason why I was able to go and study and get a degree was because of my privilege from the place that I grew up in and the family that I was raised in. And again, I think like Chris said, that type of comments or that type of feelings that it stirred in me is nothing compared to what other people experience on a daily basis, or even more frequently than that. Mm-hmm. And it was something that I needed to tell myself, just get over. And I think that's where my wife has been really amazing with having these type of conversations, because like I said, it's something that I wrestled with for a bit. I don't want people to perceive me like that, but that's just something that unfortunately is, well, not unfortunately, that's just the reality of the situation, that people will think of you in a certain way because of our past and because of the experiences that we've had. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers my reflections.
Yeah, I mean, it does. And I'm always cautious about saying, for instance, and this is when I'm talking to people about communication, right? So there is it is a fact that certain things that you might experience may pale in comparison to certain things that other people might experience. But whatever you experience is your experience. And so I don't necessarily get to, let me say this. If I don't want you to belittle my experience in comparison to yours or qualify the pain of mine some kind of way that minimizes it and makes I shouldn't do that with you either if we hope to reach any sort of common ground. I then have to try and acknowledge whatever your experience is. So where you're right to say it may, like not be the same as what my experience is. I think I do have to acknowledge what your experience is. That's difficult to do given the history, but it's something that needs to happen in order for us to be able to really talk and have, you know what I mean? Like if what you're saying to me is not based in racism and ill will towards me, then we shouldn't be able to frame it as that in order to make me comfortable, because we're never going to be able to have a good conversation about the issues as long as we're able to do that, as long as we're able to dismiss whatever you might be feeling or going through as, yeah, that's your privilege, or yeah, that's your, you're being racist or whatever. I think everybody's thing has to be brought to the table and say, this is what it is, this is this, and then we acknowledge that, and then, and then go from there. So I find that it's probably most difficult to have any of these kinds of conversations as long as we're allowed to not get clarity, but hold on to what we're thinking coming in the door on either side. Because, like we were talking, Chris was mentioning the thing about me being followed in the store or whatever. When that happens, I'll just be honest, I don't think about the fact that you may have had the experience of some other Black people stealing stuff. I get pissed off because I'm not doing it and it's not me. So it just just real, no chaser. It makes me mad enough to, start turning over stuff on the shelves. But, the last time I did that, I got arrested. So I don't do that anymore. But my point is, you know what I mean? So as enlightened and high, ground as I'd like to be to say, well, they probably see a lot of whatever. I don't think that in the moment, especially in the moment and a couple moments after that, I think I am spending money in this store like everybody else, and you're only following me because blah, blah, blah. And that makes me mad. I do not like being put in this category of being a criminal, and I'm not. I would imagine that if I was born a white man, and to see me would be to say that I'm racist and that anything I'm saying to anybody is coming from that place, I would acknowledge the history, but it would still be something that is hurtful and would make me angry if that's not my intention. So where I can't even say what it is I'm trying to say, because before you hear my words, you hear, the history. That's still to some degree unfair. Not, and it doesn't wash away any of the pain of the history, but it's still unfair, and it's okay to say that that's unfair, I think. But you guys tell me what you think. Maybe I'm off and I'm singing Kumbaya or something.
I think for me, what again, it depends on the context of the situation or the interaction that you have with somebody. But if there's an opportunity to have open, honest communication with somebody, then hopefully that will allow you to kind of express yourself a little bit better, or at least get an understanding from why this person is responding to you in that way, or why it's stirring up these feelings in you. I think where I see a lot of accusations being made towards people will be on social media, and there people might not have the full story. And so you see somebody who says one thing, or maybe a tweet or something is misinterpreted, and it blows up into, it becomes a really big thing. And I think that is probably also adding to why people aren't having these conversations, is because we are scared that we will be classified as a racist, or we will somebody will go up and dig up our past tweets where maybe somebody said something where they weren't really aware of what they were saying, and that will kind of stick with them, and they will be cancelled or I'm not sure if that's the right term. Even though I'm not that old, I'm not quite staying up with all the terminology about being cancelled and things like that. But I think that also does add to people not being willing to have these type of conversations because we are scared of what the repercussions of that will be. And I think for me, it's about becoming comfortable with what you are feeling and addressing that if it needs to be addressed. And again, being open when there's an opportunity to be open about it.
And I'd imagine,
Agreed.
you know,
Okay.
even as not speaking as a white man, but like that, especially for you, David, there are only certain, you're not going to convert everybody. And the instance of someone profiling you as you're walking into the Gap or you're going to the 7-Eleven, you, at the end of the day, you're just going to have to keep it moving, because that person isn't trying to have an intentional, thought out conversation with you around their perceived biases. You're going to, it's going to take work or intentionality from you on your behalf to say, you know what, I know what I'm here for, and I'm here to do this. They're profiling me. I can have this conversation with Chris. I can have this conversation about how do we turn the tide, because a lot of the people that we have these momentary interactions with, as Johan was saying, for me personally, I don't believe we can have culture changing engagement or intervention on social media, because people are actually loud. People are actually the worst version of themselves, and no one is invested in knowing the other person. So even when I'm out at the mall, obviously maybe there's an opportunity to stop and talk to somebody. But if someone is looking at me in a certain way as I'm going into the shop, there's nothing I can do to do about that person's perceptions outside of I've stopped and we're having a conversation. Because also I've got to protect myself. Something you were saying earlier before we started recording, that you also need to protect yourself as well. And there's an element of I've just got to keep it moving.
Sure. No, you're absolutely right. And depending on, I guess, whatever the situation is, and I was using some of the thing about the store even to say that immediate assumption, the same assumptions that's being made there are some of the same assumptions that we might take into a conversation where I'm able to have this conversation with Chris or with Johan, and we're able to actually spend some time sitting down and talking. But we might go into that conversation with some similar assumptions about each other before we actually start, dialoguing, and that can hamstring some of that dialogue. But the other thing is, in doing that, I would think a person would need to be able to say whatever it is they want to say in a safe environment or situation. I would like to think that I've created that or helped to create that, because it takes two people in this instance, but help to create that with, say, like Chris, where he should be able to say whatever it is he wants to say in order for it to be aired out, corrected if need to be, that kind of thing. Because if he doesn't and he holds that in, that thing doesn't go anywhere. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he's still looking at me as deficient. Do you see what I'm saying? So until he's able to actually say, hey, man, this is what I'm thinking. And then I say, no, see, that's not it. And I pull the curtain back. You're not really having difficult conversations. You're having like pseudo difficult ones with polite, rhetoric or whatever. But in that sense, you're having a dishonest conversation. I should be able to say what I need to say or how I feel about a thing. He should then be able to come back and say what he needs to say. That's where it's really safe and where you're really going to make any sort of headway and cover any ground. I should be able to say, hey, the only reason you gave those guys a life sentence judge whatever is because you felt like that. And then he say, no, that's not this. This is what my life has been like. And this is how I feel about this, and this. And I look at all people, and then my view goes, oh, okay. Cause I was thinking this, and no, my track record is this, this is, but he can only have that conversation if I say that and stop being polite in that safe space with him. Now, that may be on aisle 7 of the 7-Eleven when we're getting Slim Jims, but it won't be, I know it won't be for me just walking in and then I happen to see the judge. But I'm just saying, you don't even have those a lot of times in situations that are supposed to be safe, because I don't want to offend Chris or make him feel like the villain, or Chris doesn't want to say anything that makes him look like the villain, or Johan doesn't want to put his foot in his mouth. So then we'll walk away from it saying, whoo, we had a difficult conversation and we got through it when we never did really. It wasn't really that difficult. It was kid gloves and it was safe. And I'm saying the history is too potent. And what I'm hearing, the South African history is more potent and more present, because of how recent it is. It's as potent, I should say, and more present. Then we got to have some real relationships and conversations in order to cover that ground. That's my thinking.
I think if I can maybe just jump in there.
Sure.
I'm not sure. Mzamo will know what's happening with our cricket team at the moment a lot better, because I've kind of lost track on I'm not that much in the broadcasting space anymore. But so what we have in South Africa is we've got a sport called cricket, which is the better version of baseball, which you guys have there. But we've recently
there it is.
had
The prejudice just reared its ugly head. Now we're having an honest conversation.
But
That's awesome.
we've had a lot of hearings at the moment into some of the experiences that people have had in our national cricket setup, and especially some of the racism that a lot of people experience. And I think this is a good example where I'm not sure who mentioned it earlier in the conversation, is this is doing the right thing. We're ticking a box because we are creating this space, but nothing is going to change if we aren't able to continue having these conversations over and over again. Because I think and again, Mzamo, you need to correct me if I'm wrong on this, but this space that is being created, it ticks a box and it looks nice, and we feel like, oh, we are addressing the past and we are addressing the past inequalities, and it makes us feel good. But nothing is going to change if people didn't feel that they could speak openly in that type of forum, or if they didn't actually do it because of where their heart is, if their heart wasn't really in the right place. And I think that's sometimes the danger with even having a conversation like this. I might finish this and say, oh, I really challenged myself. But again, if it stops here, then what was the point of it? It's meaningless. It needs to be ongoing. And I think, I'm not sure if it was Mzamo that said it earlier, it really needs to become part of our everyday conversation. It can't just be something that we do on a Saturday and we tick it off and we feel, okay, I did my part now. We really need to continue this all the time.
And I think like some of the conversations, especially with the thing that's going on, so it's almost like a commission, Chris and David, that's going on because some of the sports in South Africa were predominantly played by white people. So with Black people coming into those spaces, there's going to be tension, and there's people not people being people. And so even as Johan is talking right now, I'm also thinking that there's also a punitive element to it. When that comes across, there's always the thought of, I've got something to lose by having this conversation. I've got something to lose by someone bringing up something from the past, as opposed to how can I actually use the lessons that we've learned to actually better the situation. Like I'm just reminded of a conversation that we had last year. So last year, mid-year, we had some, there was some unrest. There was unrest in South Africa, which had a political element of 300 people died. And so it was steeped as economics, COVID lockdowns. So it was just a whole pot for just stuff to happen. And so we had me in our cell group, and we're having these honest conversations about race. And on top of that, you've got we're still dealing with stuff around about George Floyd. So we're grappling with that, and we're having these difficult conversations. And in South Africa, we've got this thing where it's affirmative action. I want to think affirmative action plus, where there's an actual intentionality. We call it BEE, an intentional gears in legislated gears, where we're trying to give Black people opportunity. We're trying to give previously disadvantaged communities access to certain opportunities, whether working with the government or positions in corporate, that kind of stuff. And people being people, that's caused tension for the last 20, 15 years. And so you have white professionals who on this side having a conversation like in our cell group saying, I don't know if I have a place here, because as the situation in America, it's Black people are in the minority, white people are in the majority. They may be asking themselves, what's the future of a Black person in America? In South Africa, it's a question of what's the future of a white person in South Africa. So it's being courageous enough to actually listen to my friend saying that to me, who's a doctor, who's grappling with, I don't know what the future is for me and my family in this country. And it's holding that tension, speaking truth, getting to know our individual stories, but also being willing to lift up our sleeves, because there's a thing of, we can talk about it all day, we can have talk shops, but what are we going to do about it? And I think that's one of the things that's been the real issue in South Africa. We're like, we talk for days, I mean, like we have commissions left, right, and center, but what are we actually going to do about it? But it takes this kind of intentionality of face-to-face engagement and being willing to live life together that actually affects change, because your children, Chris and David, are having the experience of seeing someone else's lived reality. So it's not just you who's getting to experience another people group, but you're actually passing that on to your children and creating that maybe this is the norm. This is how we should be wanting to reach across the line.
That's makes me it's inspiring what you just said, and the notion of living with people who are different from us so that we aren't relying anymore on an idea, but rather an experience, I feel is crucial to being able to put some of our ideals into practice. Again, it's like, I'm honored to listen to the two of you talk about your lived experiences and the similarities and differences to what David and I have shared with one another about what we're going through in the US. And I want to be respectful of everyone's time. And sadly, we're near the end of the hour. I'm only hoping that we could, the four of us, arrange a part 2 to this conversation, because I feel like we've come to some important conclusions, and yet there are still so many questions I have. But I will say it's a conversation that I'm going to reflect on for quite a long time. David, close us out, and then and think of a way to get Mazamo and Johan to promise that they'll be able to come back.
Right. No, I mean, I agree with Chris's great conversation, and each thing, revelation sparks, other questions and other topics for me. So, and I appreciate, you guys taking the time to indulge us, and give us your life experience and your thoughts on, a lot of these issues from your perspective in South Africa, but also on what you're thinking about things worldwide. And we need to have you back for our part 2. We're going to have our people call your people, and see if we can get that set up. Because I would like to, sort of, bridge some other experiences as well. So, just for me, I know Chris just said it too, but thank you very much for being here and for taking the time and for what you're doing with your children now. You know, the promise of that and what it could bring to the world when they're the age of my kids or Chris's kids. Is exciting. So that's going to be pretty good also. But thank you guys. Listen, very much. And I don't know if you have any, closing remarks you'd like to leave us with, but I'll be meditating on what you're talking about also.
Closing
Can I ask you a
thought,
question?
Johan Mazama, please.
So the conversation around going into popular media, the conversation around what is social justice, what is restitution, what is right. I think also, like, I watch on this end, I watch All American and I watch The Rookie. I think it's CW and ABC shows. And in terms of like some of the subject matter that they've because of what's happened in the last 2 years, how have you felt as Americans, as a Black American, as a white American, how have you felt the media has on that end has actually held the space in terms of trying to have this conversation constructively?
Just kind of I watched at least The Rookie. I haven't watched All American. I've read up on what the show is about and some of the things that it's covered, but I haven't had the privilege of watching it. But I think they have tried to be sensitive, particularly with shows like The Rookie and like Chicago PD and some of the other cop dramas that I watch. There was a big push toward storylines around police reform and what that is. And a lot of the shows, I think, did a pretty good job of trying to ask certain questions from both sides of the police issue with regard to how they treat unarmed Black men and that kind of thing. Naturally, they'll try to tell a story where it shows that not all police officers subscribe to this notion that Black men are expendable, but some of the shows did a good job of not shying away from the fact that there are some police officers who do hold that belief and that thought, and that's not okay. So I think that they try to cover it as well as you can cover it in an hour, drama. And it was a nice way to at least start, some of those conversations. Even though real world, it's much more complex because people primarily they deal from, if you're saying don't kill unarmed Black men, police officers, then you're anti-police in some people's mind, and that's it. And that's where the conversation starts. So the shows, they were able to script them out. So it's different than in real life where people are just, shutting that down and saying either the blue line or Black Lives Matter and never shall the two meet. So, but I think what they've been trying to do on some of those shows has been to bridge that gap. And I think some of those stories are have been done well, Yeah. I don't know what Chris's take on it.
Yeah, no, I can't comment intelligently on, well, maybe anything, but definitely not those shows. I haven't watched those shows. I think that the coverage of the issue in the news, televised news programs, varies tremendously. And that's maybe a topic for another time, but it's I walk away from listening to news very frustrated that there's such a large portion of the United States, at least let's say voting adults, who don't see things with any nuance, who, as David said, pick a side and are not understanding the real motivation behind, say, defund the police, which is admittedly by founders of that movement, in retrospect, not a great title or name, because it can lead to some misconceptions. But just people get frustrated when they're not willing to ask questions and try to understand some of the nuances of an issue or of a particular situation. It's right. That's what prejudice is, like prejudging. And it just, I don't know how much progress we can make, but I remain hopeful and optimistic, but the less I watch the news sometimes, the more hopeful I am.
Indeed.
Okay.
Well, listen, thank you both so much. You've been extraordinarily generous with your time, and we're so grateful. We will send you the link when this is edited and posted, and certainly invite you back. Johan
has a comment.
Yeah.
No, yeah. So I don't know. I just want to say thank you very much before you say goodbye, just for the opportunity to be part of this conversation, because I love these conversations, because I always learn so much, and I think there's not much value that I can add other than perhaps sharing some of my experiences, but just gaining so much from having these type of conversations, and for all the work that you guys do on that side, just to continue this conversation and the guests that you've had on the show. And I also just want to mention that if you want to get me back on the show, if you can somehow find a way to send authentic New York pizza with real pepperoni to the side, then I will make all my available time yours.
There you go.
But that's the way to get me back on the show. No, but I've really loved this conversation. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah,
well, thank
you
you both so much. You can leave your mailing addresses, both of you, in the chat, and we'll see if we can get some pizza headed your way.
Right.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for listening to I'm Black, You're White, Now What?
You can find more episodes on the podcast channel Teaching What It Takes, available on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify.
To learn more about the work I do, visit www.preparingthepath.com.
And to learn more about the work I do, visit drchristhurber.com.